We've been looking, starting in verse 12, there's several different views that Paul sets forth. The first one is a view toward elders in verses 12 and 13, and we were in verse 12 in our study. Last week I mentioned that elders have the spiritual leadership of those under their care, including, I said, deacons, members, preachers, but I should have mentioned one other. That's each individual elder. Simply because an individual is an elder does not give him any responsibility whatsoever. He has no oversight whatsoever. The eldership as a whole does. And each individual must submit themselves to the oversight of the eldership. Failing to recognize that is what eventually leads to the ideas of one-person rule, in effect. If I, as an elder, have any authority by myself without the eldership, then I have, in effect, set forth a one-person rule. So it's always that each individual elder must subject themselves to the decisions of the eldership. I know many times as people talk and ask me something or ask Paul something, and I'm sure Bill, that expecting to get an answer. And the answer generally is going to be, well, I'll talk to the elders. Why? Because I don't have the authority to make a decision by myself, any one of us. Once those decisions by the eldership has been made, every individual must submit themselves to that decision. Whether they individually agree with it or not doesn't make a bit of difference. Now, we're not, of course, talking about doctrinal issues or doctrinal matters, but the expediting of God's will. And when they do that, then that individual elder is subject to the decision of the eldership. So I should have included that as well. So I thought I'd come back and pick that up. But then he says that they are to admonish you. Admonish is a word which literally is to put mind. To put in someone's mind. And thus it is translated with admonish, warn, exhort, are some of the terms that are used. A.T. Robertson said it's putting sense into the heads of people. I like the phraseology, and in a sense that is correct. And yet you know that you can't put sense in some people's heads no matter how hard you try. But that's the intent, is you put sense into the heads of people. Vine says that it is used, A, of instruction, B, of warning. And you look at those two aspects, instruction, warning. If you leave either one out, you have done an injustice to people. If they're not warned of the evil, but yet instructed as to how to deal with it and to the truth of the matter, then take one of those away and what happens? You're not ready. You haven't put sense into people's mind at that point. Swanson, in his dictionary or lexicon, adds these three definitions. Instruct, teach on proper behavior and belief. 2, admonish, rebuke, for adjectives, wrong done. Now notice that wrong done. Because 3 is to warn, advise of the consequence of, adjective, wrong action. So they break it down into both the teaching aspect, but then warning of wrong that is done and wrong actions. So he distinguishes those two aspects. As you look at this word, admonish you start understanding a little bit about the need for elders to have the ability to teach. One of those qualifications that are necessary for an elder, 1 Timothy 3 and verse 2, a bishop then must be blameless, husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. You can find some elders who are apt to teach anything. Sad to say, but it's the truth. You have some elders who are apt to teach anything. And the word apt very simply means having the ability to teach in that case. They have the ability to teach. Some elders I've seen couldn't teach it doesn't matter what you do, it'll help them out. They can't teach. And yet there's the need for that. I remember listening to an older preacher. This is 40 years ago. No, I'm not old enough to be that old. 40 or 50 years ago, put it in that range. And he was basically saying the most important qualification that God gave elders is the ability to teach. Now, I don't know if I totally agree with that, but certainly it is one of the most important things. We all recognize a lot of the problems and issues that we have in the brotherhood today. If we had elders who were prepared and had the ability to teach, most of those, if not all of those problems would go away. But elders are led around by the preacher. So whatever the preacher says, led around by the preacher. So whatever the preacher says, that's the way in which some elders would go. To give an illustration, one time I was teaching in a class, not here, someplace else, that will remain nameless. And we're discussing James' 2nd chapter. And I took what is the basic position of those who take faith only doctrine. And was arguing that, and one of the elders of that congregation started agreeing with it. That individual had very little Bible knowledge, but was led around with whoever he was around. But that shows the problem of elders who don't know how to teach and admonish. That you can get someone to come in, and remember how Peter describes these individuals who are false teachers. They come in privily, privately, to spy out your liberty.
How do you obey the gospel if you don't know that faith has more than itself?
You can't actually, but that was not his problem, that elder's problem. And that's just an illustration of the lack of Bible knowledge that a lot of elders have. And something that I have observed in the appointing of elders, that what really matters, number one, family, that they're married and have kids, and number two, that they're good business people. And as long as they meet those two qualifications, Bible knowledge doesn't make any difference. And I'm saying in a general aspect of the church today, and what it has been for many years. We don't have elders. It's interesting. We send preachers to school for 2 years to get trained at preacher training school. How many of you have heard of an elder training class or an elder training school? Nobody? Not that I know of. But yeah, you have preacher training schools. Why not elder training schools? The problem is we expect the preacher to do it for us. And elders expect the preacher. That's not the way it's ever been here that I know of. At least the entire time I've been here. We've had elders who could teach, thankfully so, and do an excellent job of it. But there's a lot of places that's not the case. And as a result, false teacher can come in and they would never know it. Because they're simply led away because they have no Bible knowledge. Now, if a preacher tried to come in and start teaching false doctrine in a congregation that has good elders that know how to teach and are keeping aware of what's going on, what can they do? They can come in real quick and say, "You're fired. You're not going to teach that here." But you don't see that in many congregations, sadly. In Acts 20 and verse 28, Paul tells the Ephesian elders specifically, "Take heed therefore unto yourselves and all the flock over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God which he hath purchased with his own blood." It's elders' responsibility to feed the flock. Now then, does that mean that elders have to do all the teaching? Obviously not. But they are still responsible for everything that is taught. And that's their job of overseeing or oversight and feeding the flock. Again, they don't have to do all of the feeding, but they have to make sure that the food that is put forth is good food and not unhealthy food. So the responsibility lies at their feet. In verse 13, he continues with this dealing with elders. to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake, and be at peace among yourselves. Notice that word esteem. It is present tense. Now, if you still have your cheat sheets, what does present tense indicate?
Habitual act.
Not so much habitual, continual.
Oh, that means the same thing.
No,
Okay.
continual.
Okay.
Habitual can mean here, 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 and thus in a sense repetitious action. Continuous is it's continuing on the entirety of the time. So esteem is continuous action. And they are to be esteemed very highly because of the work that they do in overseeing the flock, watching for the souls of the congregation. And the congregation should be motivated to do that by love for them, with the result that there will be peace in the congregation. Esteem is from a word which means to respect, to regard, or to esteem. Vincent, in his word studies, stated, to lead the mind through a reasoning process to a conclusion, so to think, to estimate. And I like that idea of leading the mind through a reasoning process to a conclusion. Now then, in this, it is the conclusion that we esteem or respect, we regard them highly. That should be our thinking process, and our process, yes, leading to that conclusion that we esteem them. When you think about, and this is the idea to lead the mind through a reasoning process, think about the work of elders in overseeing the congregation. Think about the fact that they, Hebrews 13 and verse 17, care for your souls, that they give an account for your souls, that they are looking out thus for your spiritual welfare. When we think about that and reason to that conclusion, they deserve to be esteemed, to be respected, to highly regard them. And so we as members come to that conclusion that regarding their work and because of the work that they do, that they deserve the highest honor and respect. Yet, through the years, elders have been disrespected probably as much as anyone in the church. Now, those elders who do not do the work should be disrespected. Those elders who don't know how to oversee and don't know how to feed the flock and don't have knowledge of these things, they shouldn't be elders. They disrespect that high office, that high work of what elders are. And so they don't deserve that high esteem. But elders who do the work, who's caring for the souls of the members, who's trying to make sure that they are fed spiritually and properly, then they are to be held in that high honor and respect. That also includes our submission to them and their oversight. If I'm going to esteem them very highly, how can I do that and not submit to their will and what they say? So the two go together. I submit myself to them as I'm supposed to do, as they have that oversight and that rule, and that shows that I esteem them. Are we going to submit ourselves to someone that we don't really have any respect for? We don't. And so that idea of esteeming, while it certainly is a value that we place upon them, it is seen and demonstrated in the submission that we give to them and their authority. The word very highly, interesting word. It means surpassingly or extremely. Freiberg's in his analytical lexicon defines it as the highest form of comparison imaginable, immeasurably, more or immeasurably more than. Very highly is a good translation. I'm not saying that, but yet it doesn't get the overwhelmingly aspect of it. The word it takes two, kind of like very highly, very highly.
Just one word?
Well, it's a word in the Greek that's made up of different parts. One part means very high, another part means very high, different words and come from different things, but both of them saying the same thing. It's showing the superlative aspect of this. And that's why I say very highly. It's proper translation, but yet it doesn't really get the over superabundance that this word actually indicates.
It sounds like there was overabundance. Your cup is running over.
Your cup is running over with esteem. That's a good way to put it.
What about overflowing with respect?
It would be the overflowing of respect, yes. That's why I say it's difficult to express it in English, because you've got a base word with two prefixes, both of them having to deal with greatness or highness. That's right, immeasurably more than.
One time I've ever heard that word was actually used like that was becomes very highly recommended.
Very highly recommended. And that would be, can you imagine though, okay, you can say someone's highly recommended, okay? Someone's very highly recommended. That would be the top. That's kind of what the idea is here. Except if you could put, this person is so highly recommended I can't even express it. Now then you gain more of the idea.
You think an elder would have read the Bible through it at least one time minimum, not probably 15 or 20 times. You know? Because you act deep, you got to go through it. Repetition is the key to knowledge.
Okay.
You know?
I'm not sure how that specifically has to deal with being very highly esteemed, but
They do
okay, that was what.
very highly esteem them.
Okay.
You would think that an elder would have more knowledge than a novice, a member that obeyed the gospel 2 or 3 months ago.
That's what we were talking about in Apt to Teach. Now we should esteem them and give them honor because of the work which they do, and because of their character, how many of the qualifications of elders deal with their character? Most of them. And in the position which they have. They are the ones who are overseers. I hate using the term office, even though it's used in the Bible, because sometimes people think of an office, well, they go and sit down, they have that position, but they don't do anything. That's not the idea of elders. It's a work that they are performing. So we esteem them very highly in all three of those aspects: the work they do, their character, and their position. Raymond Kelsey said, "They are not to look upon these men as a group aloof from them whose leadership they must follow because of the demands of authority. Rather, they are to regard them highly in love." Do you ever, well, you probably have known some individuals who try to, I hate to use the word lead, they try to exercise their authority as authoritarians, making demands. We don't have usually a lot of respect for them, do we? Elders are not that. They should be out in front leading the congregation. And thus regard them highly in love. In love is the motivation for esteeming them very highly. We should have a love for those who are our elders, who are overseeing us. Again, look at the work that they are involved in Hebrews 13 and verse 17. "Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, that they must, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you." Here's men who are watching for our souls. They're trying to get us to heaven. Put it that way. They're trying to make sure that when we pass from this world and Christ comes again, that we won't spend an eternity in torment, but we'll spend an eternity with God. Now then, why should we not love someone who's like that, who's trying to do that? Do that which is best for us from a spiritual standpoint. And so that becomes the reason, though, that we do love them, because of the work that they're involved in, because of what they're trying to accomplish. That one who sits as a dictator, he's not really concerned about that person's soul and where he's going to spend eternity. He's more concerned with his position and power. And he's going to exercise that power, whether to your good or to your disadvantage. But the one who is a true elder, who's trying to make sure that you're going to go to heaven, that is an individual we should love. For their work's sake. We talked a little bit in the previous verse, and the word labor there. It's a different word here. Labor in verse 12 deals with someone who does exhausting work. this is more the common word for work. It's just someone, it's someone that we would, or something that we would think of as common, just common ordinary work that he's doing. So he does make a distinction in the two words here. But then, be at peace among yourselves. Again, peace is present tense, thus it's continuous action. You continue to be at peace among yourselves. This is the result of what he has said here in verse 12 and 13. To know them that labor among you, over you, admonish you, to esteem them very highly in love. The result of doing that is peace.
Jesus said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples if you got love one for another. And how could you say you love somebody that you don't respect and submit to? I mean, especially since God is the one that hands down the requirement you do it. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You know what I mean? How can you love if you don't do that?
Okay. You wouldn't, but now then, be at peace.
Love would imply that you would have peace together.
Okay.
You look at 1 Corinthians 13 about the definition, an explanation of what love is.
The different characteristics, 16 characteristics of love that are listed in verses 4 through first part of verse 8 of 1 Corinthians. Peace, though, results from esteeming them very highly in love, which is one to include that obedience to those who are elders. Pfeiffer and Harrison state, to degrade leadership or to cavil, and that word means to raise trivial and frivolous objections. So, or to cavil with authority is to sow seeds of strife. The well-being of the Christian community among yourselves is dependent on cordial cooperation between followers and leaders. You have those who are leaders. We follow them. When we follow them without that, frivolous objections, without that degrading of the leaders, the result is peace. The problem many times of strife within a congregation is a refusal to submit to the authority of the elders. And as a result, people start talking or backstabbing the elders and gossiping one among another, and that brings strife instead of peace. The peace here, and I know, we normally talk about it from the standpoint we have peace with God through Christ Jesus and our obedience to Him and obedience to the gospel. We then come in peace with God. We have peace with others because of the peace that we have. And that would be the discussion of Ephesians 2nd chapter. But between the Jew and Gentile, Christ brought peace, brought both into one body, thus making peace. But within that body, here it is a specific type of peace that he's talking about, of members submitting themselves to the elders. And when we fail to do that, then there's not going to be peace in the congregation. That's what results in strife and hardships and leads to divisions within the congregation. And divisions that are not necessary. Divisions, and there are some, of course, divisions that are necessary. When someone's teaching a false doctrine, there's a division that is needed if he will not repent of that false doctrine. If someone's trying to cause trouble within a congregation, well, that individual needs to be marked and identified and withdrawn from. That brings division. That's God-authorized division because of individuals who are not doing what they're supposed to do. A heretic. What is a heretic? And don't say a hairy tick. I just ruined Tim's whole response there.
It's sort of like
A factious person. Someone who's causing divisions. Now, Paul told Titus, after the first and second admonition, you reject such a person. That's bringing division. What is it? Factious person. Is that someone who's submitting to the authority of the elders? Yes. He's not. And thus, Paul says, after one admonition, after a second admonition, then you reject him. In other words, you withdraw fellowship from him.
The heretic has a different belief.
A heretic, we generally use it for someone who is a false teacher. That's not the meaning of the word. The meaning of the word is used in Titus 3 and verse 10. Is someone who is a divisive individual. He's causing factions among brethren. Now, those factions might be because of false teaching. Wouldn't deny that, but he is causing, but it's not necessarily limited to a false teacher. It's just someone who's being divisive.
Somebody don't respect Jesus at all.
It's someone who does not respect the authority of the elders. Atheist, they wouldn't. Now, then, I'll answer yours. An atheist would not necessarily be referred to as a heretic, because a heretic is someone who is a member of the church. He's dealing with individuals who are members of the church. Thus, it would not include someone who's a... Right. God has given a standard of authority. Yes, God, Christ, and then within the congregation, the elders. And all members thus are subject to the elders. Well, when someone is divisive, they're not being in submission to the elders. That causes a division. If the entire congregation is in submission to the elders and esteeming them very highly in love for their work's sake, the result's peace. Everyone's on the same road, going in the same direction, and thus you have peace. So in summary of these two verses and Paul's view of elders, he admonishes both elders and members. Members are to, 1, know the elders. 2, to esteem them, esteem elders. And 3, to love them. elders have the responsibility to oversee them. Number 2, they have the responsibility of laboring and working with them. And number 3, admonishing them, which includes both that aspect of teaching and warning. That's why we teach in regards to false doctrine, false teaching, and the person who's doing it, so that people can be warned against that. But also the proper teaching that needs to be done. Any questions real quick before we end this? And Lord willing, maybe next week, maybe the week after. We'll start at verse 14 and verse 15 on a view toward others.